Now, Washington Mornings on the Mall. At AM 630.
It is 8:07 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. Brian Wilson and Larry O'Connor. Listen, we have continuing coverage of what happened in Boston yesterday, and one of the things that we are hearing this morning is that the FBI has a person of interest, not charged, not under arrest, not quite free to go. What does that mean? We'll talk to Andrew McCarthy, a former prosecutor, about exactly what a person of person of interest is as the morning continues. Larry?
We're also going to ask Bill Gavin about that as well. He would know. He's the former assistant director of the FBI in New York, tracked down the first World Trade Center bombers, and he is also the vice president of Guardsmark, Excellence in Security Solutions. And Bill, Gavin, thanks so much for joining us this morning. I'm sure it's a very busy morning for you.
It's my pleasure, though. It is a little bit busy.
Well, as we see things unfold up there in Boston, and we saw that last night the FBI took control of the investigation, we do hear that they have a person of interest. What we know about him so far, what's been leaked, is that it is a 20-year-old Saudi national who has a student visa. He's in the hospital. We're told that he's not necessarily detained, but they're not letting him leave. And they have investigated an apartment or a home in neighboring Revere, Massachusetts, that has some connection to this this person. So I ask you, I mean, going back to your investigation of the World Trade Center bombings, how quickly do these things unfold generally, and what kind of information that comes in this quickly on an investigation can you sort of sort through and really get to the truth of the matter?
Well, it's a little difficult sometimes, Larry. What happened in this particular case, I think this individual was injured during the course of the explosion of the IED. Is it because he set it off and was too close or not? He's in the hospital. He's a person of interest. He's probably being held in the hospital for medical reasons as opposed to law enforcement reasons. But you have to follow up on every single lead. And somebody said he looked nervous, he was running. Well, that can apply to anybody that's in that kind of a situation. But when they interviewed him in the hospital, perhaps there was some additional information that they said, this needs to be fleshed out. And so they went to Revere, to his apartment on Revere Beach. And I guess they took probably some records and whatnot out of that apartment. Is he still a person of interest, or is it raised above that? That remains to be seen. Dick Delorius, who's the special agent in charge of the Boston FBI office, is going to have a news conference, at 9:30. And I think that will probably unravel this just a little bit more.
Bill, I'm sorry, one quick question. We're hearing a lot of information about the components that made up these explosive devices and how that can be a roadmap into at least sorting out what type of group this might have been involved. Can you shed a little light on that?
Sure. The treasure trove, really, I think they found 3 unexploded bombs. That is a treasure trove, because what they'll do then is they'll deactivate them. They look at the triggering mechanism. They look at the kind of explosive. They look at what was put into that explosive. Was it ball bearings? Was it nails? Was it other pieces of metal? They shred human tissue and cause high trauma and damage to any individual that gets hit by them. So they're looking at those now. They're looking at the bombs that didn't go off. They're going to take every shred of bomb material, that is what has been taken out of individuals who were treated at the hospital, and the medical examiner will look at the 3 that have died. And all of that will be sifted, sorted, and looked at in terms of what kind of a bomb this was.
Well, let me
set it up.
Let me ask you about that, because we're hearing very conflicting reports about the unexploded devices. I mean, there are some reports that say, yes, there were maybe 3, maybe 5 unexploded devices that were found and deactivated by police. And then we hear other people say, no, that is simply not the case. So let's assume for the moment that maybe there are unexploded devices and they're trying to get some data out of that. What can we learn from the remnants of the exploded devices?
From the remnants of the exploded devices, we go back again. It's a little bit more difficult to determine the nature of the timing mechanism or the device, the trigger device. It's a little bit more difficult to determine the kind of explosive used in the IED. But they'll continue to look at all of these things, the residue that's there on the street. Was it a directed? Was it a shaped charge? Was it not a shaped charge? All those kinds of things can be determined from the devices that did explode. I agree with you. There's been nobody from the police officers or the FBI or the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Boston yet who has said that there are unexploded devices, and I think that will probably come out during the news conference at 9:30 with the Joint Terrorism Task Force and the United States Attorney's Office up there.
Do you draw anything from the fact that these devices were at least sophisticated enough to be exploded one after the other in pretty close, timing, and the fact that they apparently were packed with, we are told, ball bearings and other bits of shrapnel?
Yeah, that's kind of typical of somebody who wants to cause maximum damage. You sequence the detonation, whereby when one goes off, people start to run away from that bomb, and they try to filter people into the area where the next bomb will go off, so they have maximum damage there. There's not enough information, verified, concrete information at this particular point in time, known to everybody, to draw any real conclusion as to who might have done this, whether it's a group or whether it's a lone person. But I think the kind of bomb, once they determine what the explosive was and the triggering mechanism, will lead them to websites to teach people how to make bombs. And is it this kind of bomb? So could it be a lone wolf as opposed to any group doing this? All of these things still have to be sieved and fleshed out.
Bill Gavin's our guest. He's the former assistant director of the FBI in New York, and he tracked down the first World Trade Center bombers. And I wonder, you often get groups who claim responsibility. Sometimes multiple groups claim responsibility, which is always remarkable to me. Right now, all we know is that Pakistan's version of the Taliban have come out and said, we had nothing to do with this. And beyond that, we haven't heard anything. What do you make of that? And what is your experience with the World Trade Center bombing? Did Al-Qaeda jump out and say, oh, yeah, that was us?
No, that was so early in the days of Al-Qaeda that nobody jumped up and said anything. The kind of information that we got on that was due to early identification of the individuals involved. As you recall, we identified the person who rented the truck in Jersey City, New Jersey, and were able to start tracing things back. I was in Egypt and arrested Mahmoud Abu Hulima in Egypt, and he was a source of some good information on that flight back home. I was in Islamabad, Pakistan, for Ramzi Youssef, and again, he had such an ego trip that one of the things that he did on the way home was he said, I showed him the World Trade Center still standing, and he said it wouldn't be if he had enough explosive and enough money. Well, that's as good as a confession.
Wow.
What was the one little piece of evidence that sort of put it all together for you?
The one piece of evidence that really started the chain of resolution was the frame of the Ryder truck. We were able to get the VIN, trace the truck from manufacturer to, I believe, New Orleans, and then back up to Jersey City. And when we went to see who rented the truck, one of the individuals who was responsible for the bombing reported the truck stolen, and they said, well, you can come in. If the truck is stolen, we owe you X amount of dollars. I think it was around $400. And so this fool came back in and to pick up his money. And
oh, my gosh.
First arrest started.
Unbelievable.
All right, Bill Gavin, Vice President of Guardsmark and former Assistant Director of FBI, your wealth of information on a day like this. We really appreciate you joining.